Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's video about a Game of Thrones spinoff. So I was working on a Game of Thrones video about Lyanna Mormont, but it was slow going and I wasn't sure if I had the time to do it this week. So I'm actually going to postpone that for a later date when instead talk about the news that just dropped today. So there's been a lot of spin-off talk for a while. In fact, I had a few viewers requested I do a video about a spin-off, but then I thought, well, there's really not much to talk about until we get any news. But we got some news today that's pretty much confirmed there will definitely be a spin-off. Although, you know, HBO execs have been saying this for a while, but the news we got today is that they have hired 4 different writers to come up with 4 different ideas. So basically, they're just throwing it out there, and they're going to test these 4 ideas, and HBO is going to decide which one they like and develop it into a show. And in fact, they said they're open to the possibility, if they like more than one idea, they could possibly do more than one show. Although, I don't want it to be misreported, has some people saying, oh, they're doing 4 spin-offs, which isn't what they're saying. They're just laying the groundwork for 4 different ideas, and they're going to choose out of these 4 ideas which ones they like. So these writers are hired, they're working on it, but it's still very early days. We probably won't get any news. We don't know what the ideas are yet. Obviously, they're not going to release that yet. But we know who the writers are that they're working with. So they're going to put these 4 different ideas out, and HBO will decide. So it's still really early going. It's they're just starting this process now, so we probably won't get the actual confirmation on which show is gonna be the spinoff until season 8 is airing. Possibly not until season 8 is finished. Well, I'm sure we'll know by the end of the Game of Thrones. Once it's finished, we'll know what the spinoff is. But around then, now it's just the early news of their developing. So the writers that they have developed is Max Bernstein, if I pronounce that correctly, who apparently has worked on some monster movies like Kong, Skull Island, and the newest iteration of Godzilla, and also the TV show Minority Report. So I don't really know much about those. I haven't actually seen any of those. But that's interesting. That's one of the writers. Another writer is Brian Helgeland, if I pronounce that correctly, who apparently has been involved in films like A Knight's Tale and LA Confidential, which were decent films. So that's interesting to hear. And then there's 2 writers who will be working with George R.R. Martin to come up with these ideas. Now, I'm sure he's not going to be extensively involved because he's probably too busy. He should be working on The Winds of Winter, god damn it. But I'm sure he's like a consultant. And so there was speculation about that. Does this mean that they're working on sequels because they're asking George for material they don't know about yet, or possibly could have something to do with the ending of Game of Thrones, the ending of Song of Ice and Fire, and that's why they need to consult with him? Possibly. Again, it's all wild speculation. There's no way of knowing. But anyway, these 2 writers who are working with George R.R. Martin are Jane Goldman, who apparently wrote for Kingsman, X-Men First Class, and that's pretty interesting. That's pretty high class action movies there. And also Carly Ray, who wrote for Mad Men and a few other things, a few other shows. I think she actually worked in The Leftovers a bit as well, from what I heard. So a lot of drama, slow pace. Now that's really interesting. So it'll be interesting. We got the monster movie, we got the drama base, we got this action movie writer. So they obviously pitched it out to get vastly different ideas, and I'm sure they'll base it more off of the richness of the idea that the writer comes off with, rather than sticking to an idea that fans want, like Duncan Egg or Robert's Rebellion. They're not going to base it off that idea. They're going to base it off what the writer comes up with and how it will work for the TV show. Now, I don't know. They haven't confirmed. They're just calling them writers at the moment, but I think the idea is that they would become the the showrunners, the producers, but that's not for certain. Maybe they'll just create the show idea and turn it over to someone else. Again, we have no idea at this stage. It's still early goings, but we do know that Dan and Dave will not be producing the show, which I was like, duh. I think they officially announced this at the end of last year, and it was obvious to me. Like a couple of years ago, HBO was saying, "Oh, we'll do a Game of Thrones spinoff, but only if Dan and Dave will be involved." And like, then you're not doing a spinoff because Dan and Dave are not going to do it. You can tell how tired they are. I mean, it's. You know, if you watch any of the behind-the-scenes stuff about Game of Thrones, like the work that goes into putting this out is astronomical. Like each episode is basically half of a feature film being made, and usually you take a year to make a feature film, but they have less than a year to make like 5 feature films. So you can just, and they film in like 5 different countries. I mean, you just imagine how exhausting. And I think that's a lot of people give them shit, of course, obviously, you know, but I think they deserve a lot more credit. But I knew, like, you watch them in the interviews, they always look so tired. They're like, yeah, we like this idea. So I knew there was, and this is the way that they talk. They always talk like, oh yeah, it would be great to get this over with. And a lot of criticisms come again with them that we feel like that they're rushing the last 2 seasons because they just want it over with, which I think there might be an element to it. I think that might be fair criticism, but I still think it's great. I still love season 6, and I still have high hopes for season 7. I just hope they don't rush it too much. But yeah, so I knew that Dan and Dave wouldn't be directly involved in the spinoff, but it's been announced they will be executive producers, and so will George R. R. Martin. So basically, that's just saying they're going to be involved like pretty much as George R. R. Martin is involved in Game of Thrones, which is to say he was quite involved at the start, but right now I'd say he has very little to do with it. And I think the same will be true with Dan and Dave, is that they'll consult or whatever. They're called executive producers, but they don't really have their hands in the muck like the actual showrunners do. In fact, HBO execs said that Dan and Dave will be taking some much-deserved time off, some much-deserved rest once Game of Thrones is finished. And I think that's fine. That's why I think it's actually good that they're staying on as executive producers, because then we can at least keep some sort of continuity or some of the same flavor that Game of Thrones has. And I think that's why they're doing it, because they want to make sure they maintain quality throughout. And obviously they've recruited 4 really high-class experienced writers to pitch these ideas. So yeah, this is really exciting. Now, as for my, again, this is wild speculation because we have no idea, but you could speculate about what time period they're going to put it in. Some people have even thrown the idea out of a sequel, and I don't know. I mean, I suppose that could be one of the ideas that they're working on. Maybe that's why, with one of the writers who's working with George R. R. Martin, because they want to have something that takes place after Game of Thrones. But of course, not knowing how Game of Thrones ends, it's hard to speculate on what a sequel would look like, because that depends on how the show ends. Like some people saying, oh, maybe we'll see Bran like 40 years in the future where he's this wise mentor figure or whatever. Maybe. I don't know. To me, those sequel ideas would have a harder time of sort of getting me to accept them. They would have to really pitch me something good. But again, it kind of depends on how the show ends. And with the prequels, you get prequel-itis, of course, particularly with an idea like Robert's Rebellion, where it takes place so close to Game of Thrones, whereas there wouldn't be that sort of surprise, because we know, everyone, all the huge fans, everyone who's read the books, they know exactly what happens in Robert's Rebellion. So yeah, that does make me sort of least excited. I think that's probably the most pitchable idea, though, as far as HBO is concerned, because it has a lot of the same characters of Game of Thrones. There's a lot of familiarity with the Game of Thrones show, so fans would be able to latch on to, so we know we have some of the same characters like Tywin and Ned, and get to see them younger, but I think it would be harder to keep it fresh, since we pretty much know what happens. And what would they do? Because they already hired an actor to play Ned Stark, young Ned Stark during Robert's Rebellion, so would they keep the same actor? Would they just disregard that continuity and hire a different one? I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe they had that in mind when they hired that actor, said maybe he'll have to go on and do a prequel. Possibly. I mean, who knows? But if we did something like, a lot of people were pushing for something like Old Valyria, or The Long Night with the original Night's Watch, or even going way back to like the Children of the Forest versus the Andals, and something like that, you definitely, even though it's technically a prequel, you'd have a lot more leeway to play in that field. And maybe, again, maybe one of those writers who's working with George R. R. Martin is working an idea like that, like Old Valyria, because there's pretty much nothing, like the information we have on it is so vague. Like if you read World of Ice and Fire, it basically will say not much is known about this time. So they would, I could conceive that a writer would have to consult with George, because they would pretty much have to be making this from scratch. So any of those sort of long distance past things, you have a lot more, even though it's technically a prequel, you have a lot more ability to surprise and create new storylines and new ideas, and even learn a lot about the past. Now, I am not, a lot of people are like really down on prequels overall because they got burned by a lot of prequels, like the Star Wars prequels and Star Trek Enterprise and stuff like that. But those of us who've seen Better Call Saul knows that a prequel can be done right and done good and have original and still have ties to setting up, this is how things were set up, while still being a great original story on its own right. And I have faith that any Game of Thrones prequel idea would do the same thing, especially they have the quality of writers that they're looking at, and throw the same sort of quality that they did in the Game of Thrones to it. So as for, and of course I had to bring up Dunk and Egg. That's something that George R. R. Martin has been on the record before saying that is the idea he would most like to see, because that's the story that he's developed, and that's the one that has the most source material out there, so they wouldn't have to be creating it from pretty much from scratch, like if they did like Old Valyria or something like that. But the thing I would strike against Dunk and Egg is that seems, I haven't read the books, I've been meaning to, but it seems to me that it's, and I have heard this from those who have read the books, that it's more of a focus story. It's like one or two characters is the main focus, whereas Game of Thrones has been like a wide ensemble cast, sweeping epic or whatever, taking place in multiple locations, and it seems to me that HBO might want to keep that same feel. But maybe Dunk and Egg is one of the 4 ideas that are looking after, and they'll see if that, maybe they'll switch to a more focused if the idea is stronger than the other ideas. I don't know, I think it's a strong possibility that Dunk and Egg has got to be at least one of the 4 ideas, but you never know. Again, all speculations at this point. And then, of course, there's also something like Aegon's Conquest, where there is actually a lot of information about Aegon's Conquest, a lot of specifics, but it's very broad strokes. It's like reading a history book. You don't get the feel of the characters, you don't get the feel of the interaction. So it would be interesting, even though those who've read all the books and source material like World of Ice and Fire will know what's going to happen. And there's still a lot of room for developing characters and developing stories that could still surprise us in some way, even though we know the broad strokes. And it would be interesting to see that play out. So maybe that's one of the ideas, but again, who knows? And it could, any of the other Targaryen kings that came after Aegon up until Daenerys, like someone even suggested maybe one of the ideas is like a show that shows the entire dynasty of the Targaryens, starting with Aegon, going all the way up through the Mad King. I doubt it. That sounds very, very sweeping, very fast moving, but it could be. Who knows? Nobody knows. It could be anything at this point. In fact, I think the most likely possibility is that at least one of the ideas is something we've never thought of. It's something I haven't listed, something no one has listed, because it's something that they're completely making up. And again, this could be a sequel or maybe not. But I think we might be surprised with what they choose as a spinoff. So it's and this is kind of why I didn't originally want to do a spinoff video, because it's all just wild speculation at this point. But it is interesting that we have this specific news now of the 4 different writers working on a spinoff idea. So again, I wouldn't hold your breath for any news on this. It would probably be at least until like a year from now, maybe later, till we actually get even any wind of what these ideas actually are. But it is interesting to talk about, interesting to know that they're definitely, and it's no surprise to me, like, that HBO would definitely be creating a spinoff, because they didn't want Game of Thrones to end. It's Dan and Dave who said this is where the story goes, and HBO was smart enough not to stand in their way and say, no, you have to keep the show going, because there have been shows like that in the past, where the studio stepped in and, like, because the show's too popular, no, you can't end it, you have to keep going. And those shows always end up going very badly, because you can tell that the writers are, their heart's not in it anymore, the story actually should have ended, and it just feels stretched just to drain money. So HBO was smart enough not to do that, to be like, okay, well, these are the showrunners, they know their story best, they think it should end at season 8, we'll let it end at season 8. But obviously they don't want it to end, because it's the most, you know, their most money-making, the most popular show that they ever had in the history of their entire network. So obviously, and it actually seems to be gaining popularity every year rather than losing popularity. So it's obvious, most obvious thing in the world, that they'd make a spinoff, because they want to keep this moneymaker going. It's the most popular thing, and it's won awards, good quality. So if they can't keep the Game of Thrones show going, that's obviously they do a spinoff to keep that sort of legacy going. I'm fine with that. Like, again, getting back to Better Call Saul, because Breaking Bad did the same thing, because that was at the height of its popularity. That was a huge, popular, critically successful show, but they ended it early rather than stretch out the story, and that was like the smartest idea ever, because that last season was amazing. And instead they did a spinoff, which is also amazing, Better Call Saul. So I'm sure it will be the same thing here with great Game of Thrones, so I absolutely can't wait. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching this impromptu video on Game of Thrones. I will get back to that Lyanna Mormont video I'm planning on doing maybe a month from now, but yeah, I'm a bit busy with other reviews that I'm doing at the moment, but I do have plans to do more Game of Thrones videos, and I'll definitely, like, as soon as the trailer for Season 7 drops, I'm on top of that. And as I said, mentioned in another video, I'll be doing 3 videos for each episode of Season 7 as that comes out. So yeah, and once Better Call Saul and The Leftovers finish running, I do plan on getting back to doing 1 Game of Thrones episode a week on the lead up to Season 7. So yeah, be sure to subscribe to keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.